Today we'll be discussing our top 5 episodes of Friends, and we'll be discussing ketamine. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr. Asif Doja, and this is the Doctor of Laughs.
Not a real doctor.
Ali Hassan. Every episode I pick a topic for Ali from comedy and entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic from medicine and health and grills me on that topic. Now, today in a bit of a switch up, we'll be doing the medical topic first. We're going to be talking about ketamine and Matthew Perry's death and some of the recent news items surrounding this. Then we'll end things more on a lighthearted topic, and we're going to be going over our top 5 episodes of Friends. Ali, is that okay with you? I know I'm being a bit bold in switching things up.
How dare you step on my toes, you son of a... Yeah, I'm okay. The longer we take to get to Friends, which I was never a super fan of, that's not true. I loved it. That's not even true. I'm trying to pretend like I'm a guy who wasn't into Friends. I think I've told you about this before. We have a friend, you know him as well, who used to, I remember I was at McGill at the time. He would be sprinting across campus to get home to watch Friends. And we would always laugh that he was leaving his real friends at top speed to get back to his place to watch a show about fake friends. And that kind of made me realize this show is ridiculous.
That's funny. It was a funny show because it was on, okay, I guess we're talking about Friends for a bit now, but it was on that Thursday night comedy lineup on NBC, which was just great. Seinfeld,
was that the must-see TV?
Yeah. Seinfeld, Friends, Cheers, Night Court for a bit, but then that's kind of switched. And, you know, Friends was great. They tried a bunch of shows kind of to help with this Thursday night block because the 8:30 spot was always a hard one to fill, and they eventually kind of figured it out with Friends, and that became the juggernaut. I always thought it was good. Not my favorite show. Again, I had lots of friends who it was their favorite show, but I do think that it does stand the test of time. And as we were preparing for this episode, I really remembered like how I just truly enjoyed some of the episodes, especially some of the scenes that we're going to be talking about. And of course, it's related because we're going to be talking about Matthew Perry's death. We did an episode, which you guys can find in the archives, about Matthew Perry. We didn't know exactly what the cause of his death was. We assumed it was due to illicit substances, but of course now more information has come out with ketamine. So again, we'll talk a bit about that. It's funny, by the way, like, I don't know if I'd mentioned this when we did our initial episode of Matthew Perry, like the name Chandler, right? Like I met only a few people who were clearly born around the time when Friends premiered, named Chandler. And I'm like, you know, they had to have been born in a very specific amount of time, right? Friends had to have just started. So they're like, oh, that name sounds really good. But Friends hadn't become the huge success it is, because then anybody named Chandler would immediately, you know, you think of Chandler Bing, right? So there's a very short window where you could have actually rationally named your kid. Yeah.
Once they started making $1 million per episode.
Yeah, exactly. It was all. Yeah. So let's get into the death of Matthew Perry right now, and then ending the episode on a more positive note with our top Friends episodes.
Let me start with this. So an autopsy determined that Mr. Perry, quote, had died from the acute effects of ketamine, with drowning as one of several contributing factors. This is not how human beings typically talk. This is very medical speak, right? Like we just say he drowned. What does this mean, that he died from ketamine and drowning was one of the factors of the, I mean, I need to understand that first.
I know. So to make it brief, it's a bit complicated in terms of the way, you know, coroners and pathologists refer to things. So what they're saying is, you know, the immediate cause of his death was probably drowning, right? In other words, he went under the water, I believe in his hot tub, and drowned. But the real question is, what is the main cause of that? So let's say that they found out that he had a heart attack and then fell into the water. So what would be the cause of his death? the cause of this was actually the heart attack. It's just that he happened to be in the water, right? That'd be a lot different than someone who's like, oh, I'm a really strong swimmer. I'm going to go swimming in the lake this weekend, tries to go swimming and then drowns for whatever reason, right? So that you see how or their boat capsizes and they drown, right? It's a different situation. Or some of my patients, sadly, they have a seizure and then they drown, right? So even though they drowned, it was the seizure that caused their death, really.
Sure.
So that's what they're saying. They found very high levels of ketamine in his blood when they did the autopsy, and they're attributing that ketamine to causing the drowning, to causing his death.
Right. And let's get to, in just a few minutes, why Matthew Perry would be on ketamine. But let me talk to you about my limited knowledge of ketamine. However not limited it might be, it might add to some of your knowledge of it because it's from the recreational drug world,
right?
Which I may or may not have been. Yes.
Yeah, well, you've
Don't
had
say
friends.
it. Don't say it.
Trying to help you out here. You've had friends who, I guess, indulged in this.
There you go.
Acquaintances,
there it is.
Perhaps.
Sure. So ketamine, it was something that, like, it's very funny. You look up the drug fact sheet, the DEA, a drug fact sheet. They say ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic that has some hallucinogenic effects. Now, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when people were really into what was then called E or Molly, but more E or ecstasy than anything, which is MDMA, which is a very happy drug. And people have sort of always been into cocaine, has always been around. I don't know if there've been more popular and less popular times, but cocaine's always been around. But ketamine was also there on the fringes. But what I mean by on the fringes is that at some parties, there was always some weirdo who was like, no, I'm not going to do E, the happy drug, that's what that's known for. I'm going to do this thing called Special K. It was either called Special K or Super K or Vitamin K. And you scratch the surface a tiny bit and go, what is Special K? And they would say, it's actually cat tranquilizer. Which, with all due respect to all users, that doesn't sound super or special or even vitamin-y. It never sounded good. And just to give you a little medical thing about it, ketamine would really, as I said, it has these hallucinogenic effects, but often, at least the way it was being done at parties, people would go into a K-hole. And I don't know if you know that term at all, Asif.
I only heard about it while I was researching ketamine for this topic. I've never heard of this before.
Okay.
You called me a K-hole before,
I've called you a something hole for sure. But K-hole is let me give you the textbook definition here. During a K-hole, users experience an enhanced detachment from the environment, resulting in an inability to respond to surroundings and move their bodies functionally. You can imagine if you're at a party and people are doing party drugs or even just having a few drinks, who is the person who wants to not be able to move their body or respond to their surroundings? It was a weird thing. Mm-hmm. Why would you want that? But those who believed in it believed in a lot. As I say, it was sort of more of a fringe element. That is all I knew about ketamine, cat tranquilizer and K-holes. And that's, obviously very dated information. I'm definitely going to add that. And I haven't heard much about it except, here and there. So I was a little bit surprised to hear about the connection of this drug with Matthew Perry. But Matthew Perry, as you read on about this and as we're about to talk about, was not doing this because of the recreational drug aspect of it. At least he started doing ketamine for different reasons. So let's start with the first question that I should be asking about this to illuminate a little bit about this. Talk to me about what ketamine is above and beyond this.
And then maybe at the end, we can circle back to exactly what happened with Matthew Perry, how he got involved with this, and the update, because again, it's been in the news a lot lately and people were probably wondering how it's related. Okay. So it was first created, the drug ketamine, in 1962 by a guy named Calvin Stevens, who worked at Wayne State University. And he also was a consultant for Park Davis, the pharmaceutical company. And so it was called CI-581. That was the research name. And they were trying to create a new anesthetic, which had a short duration of action and not a lot of toxicity. And they were kind of making it to compete with PCP. We've heard of PCP, which is phencyclidine. But phencyclidine being used as an anesthetic had a lot of side effects. That's why it's used as a drug of abuse. And so they were trying to find something else. They did some research in animals, and they actually tested it on human prisoners in 1964. Don't ask me about how consent was obtained for those prisoners, but they found that it did work, and they wanted to call the state of anesthesia induced by ketamine dreaming. But the company, Park Davis, is like, no, you're not calling it dreaming. So then they changed it and called it dissociative anesthesia, which is what you were talking about when you were talking about the effects. So it was eventually submitted and then approved by the FDA. And it was first really used as an anesthetic in soldiers in the Vietnam War because, for reasons that we'll talk about, it actually works very well in the field to be used as an anesthetic. You know, in these field hospitals, field medics, you have to do like an amputation or you have to do like a field surgery. It can work quite well because it works quickly and doesn't have some of the side effects that some other anesthetics would. So it is used primarily for inducing anesthesia. But we'll talk about some of the other uses, which I think gets into what Matthew Perry was using it for, and we can talk a bit about the abuse as well. So basically, it does induce this trance-like state, as you're talking about. The reason why it is useful is that you don't need to give people a muscle relaxant or muscle paralysis with it. And it doesn't cause as much breathing depression as some other anesthetics, and it doesn't affect your blood pressure. So people probably don't know this, but a lot of anesthetics we use, we talked about propofol before, the milk, you know, and some of that was Michael Jackson was using, and some other of these anesthetics. They can affect your blood pressure and lower your blood pressure, but ketamine doesn't do that as much. So because of that, that's one of the reasons why people like using it, because you can use it sometimes, just give it to people. You don't have to support their breathing, doesn't affect their blood pressure, and then you can stop it. So you can see again why that would be helpful in like a field hospital, right? One of the issues, though, is it does cause what I'll call psychotomimetic effects, which are like a delirium or psychosis type behaviors. So the question about why that happens is because ketamine acts on NMDA receptors. So you guys might remember an episode from a couple of years ago, we talked about anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis. This was the brain on fire disease. So what happens with those patients is they get antibodies that are created and attack their brain and are blocking these NMDA receptors. Okay? NMDA is part of the neurotransmitter called glutamate in the brain. That's an excitatory neurotransmitter. So it excites the brain. Okay? So when you block the NMDA with something like ketamine or that anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis, you're going to create some adverse effects. So obviously blocking excitation could make you sedated, and it could make you, you know, go into like a coma or trance-like state, dissociative state. But at lesser levels, it can induce this kind of psychosis or delirium. So that's basically how ketamine works and how it was created.
Okay, so what is it used for now in the whatever 2000s, let's say? What has it turned into?
Right. The most common thing it's used for sedation for like a surgery or procedure or something like that. So that's anesthetic dose. But you can use it at a lower dose, and this may be what you're getting at. I'll also mention a couple of things. It can be used to treat seizures. Some patients, we've talked about this again on a previous episode, will have prolonged seizures. That's called status epilepticus, like an ongoing seizure that's not stopping. And if it doesn't respond to standard treatment, sometimes we have to use other things, and sometimes we use ketamine, and that can be used for that. But I think what you're getting at, Ali, is what it's used for now is for depression. So this is being used at lower doses than what we use for anesthesia, but it's used for depression. And it's what's called a very rapid antidepressant, rapid acting antidepressant. And so if you give it intravenously to somebody, in someone who, say, has a treatment-resistant depression, and there's lots of studies that looked at this. This isn't like making up. There's evidence behind this. It can result in improved mood within 4 hours of giving the ketamine. And it reaches its peak effect at 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. And I thought, you know, there's a New York Times article from May of last year that we should definitely link to, which was kind of, I mean, it was illuminating for me. You know, it's not the go-to for depression by any means, right? It is an alternative therapy, it's referred to, for depression. And it is something that when people have tried 2 treatments that did not work for their depression, it is at least as effective as electroconvulsive therapy, which I didn't know that was a robust treatment for depression at all. And they even say in that article, there's some bad press for what's called ECT, convulsive therapy, because of Hollywood movies and people putting, steel bin on their head, steel bowl, and then getting electrocuted. And I'll be honest, I have no other context for what ECT is other than what I've seen in film and television. I've never seen it in any documentary, and I've never seen it in person. So I don't know if you want to take a minute to talk about electroconvulsive therapy and then how ketamine has ranked opposite that.
Yeah, so electroconvulsive therapy definitely works for treatment of resistant depression. That's well established. The thing is, as you said, it's what's kind of popularized in the media, which is like, as you said, people getting electric shocks. First of all, people are always put to sleep for it. So you're never awake, with your eyes open, experiencing the electric shock. But it definitely works. How it works, there's lots of different theories about how ECT works, but it's definitely a treatment that I think gets a lot of flack only because people are just biased against it because of what they've seen in television shows and movies, but it's certainly a possibility. So again, when we're talking, as you said, it's been approved, for example, in Canada, the Canadian Network for Mood and Anxiety Treatments, CanMat, recommends a ketamine derivative as a third-line treatment for depression. So again, the same kind of areas when you'd be looking into ECT. So this derivative is called S-ketamine, and it's sold commercially as something called Spravato. Okay. And it's given intranasally, and it's approved also in the US for treatment-resistant depression. And it does work. So we've talked about before about want to look at all the studies and put them together. You can do a systematic review. And one big organization that does systematic reviews is called Cochrane. Okay. So they did a Cochrane systematic review of all the trials looking at this ketamine and S-ketamine. And they found that people treated with ketamine or S-ketamine consistently across trials will have a remission of symptoms in their depression. Usually lasts for 1 to 7 days. Okay. That's why it's a short-acting treatment for depression. So it sounds great, right? So it does work and there's evidence for it. So that's something else that can be thought of as a treatment. But the problem is the FDA in 2022 issued an alert to healthcare professionals using these nasal spray products with ketamine to treat depression, saying that they had some concerns, especially about people abusing ketamine. And they made it relatively strict in the US that the prescribing and especially the administration of this nasal form of ketamine has to be done in a supervised setting. So you can't just prescribe and have someone take it at home like you might take a nasal spray for your, sinus congestion, right? Like this has to be supervised by a physician when you're getting it. So because of these concerns about abuse.
Which is interesting also because I did read that, it is a low addiction risk compared to opioids. But then you also read that it can produce this, out of body experience that some people might enjoy. And you imagine if somebody has depression, you would want this enjoyable out of body experience where you don't think about all the things that depress you or feel those emotions.
Yeah. So maybe we'll talk a bit about these effects that people get, and then of course, why it could be abuse, and then what the kind of the risks of that are. So, in terms of overall side effects, anesthetic doses, so doses used for anesthesia, 10 to 20% of adults and 1 to 2% of children will experience a psychiatric reaction as they're waking up from the anesthesia. It could just be vivid dreams. It could be just, feeling amazing, like so, again, like as if you had depression and now it's kind of cured, or hallucinations, or being completely delirious, okay? But at these lower doses, then you have more of these psychiatric effects. So less of the sedating and more of the psychiatric effects. So when you ask people who get these lower doses, how do they feel? They feel strange, kind of woozy, a sense that they're floating, numbness. You could have difficulty speaking or confusion or drowsiness. And then some people will have this experience of going into a hole, right? And disappearing, feeling like they're melting, right? And if you're getting an injection or taking it intranasally, these effects happen most at the beginning and then usually disappear within about 4 hours of its use, which makes sense, right? Because that's when they looked at these treatments, like you can imagine most people have improved mood between 4 hours. So you may have these side effects at the beginning and then you have improved mood afterwards. So you can maybe see how some of these things could then make people want to use it recreationally.
And then you mentioned there are other side effects. What are those?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw in that New York Times article that you were talking about, Ali, they talked about these bladder side effects, which are not insignificant. So this occurs in about 20 to 30% of frequent users of ketamine. They have bladder complaints. They can range from having to go to the bathroom more, painful urination, blood in your urine, and inflammation of your bladder. And sometimes it can even progress to kidney failure. And so there's lots of examples in the New York Times article. They talk about people who have been abusing ketamine. So in other words, it gets prescribed to them, and we could talk about the problem with prescribing it in the States, but it gets prescribed to them, and then they use a lot of it. They often run out of their regular prescription because they're using it so much. Then they have to kind of find illegal ways to get the prescription, and then they're using it even more. One person they talked about has to use a catheter to empty their bladder. Another woman who's 37 has to wear adult diapers because of the bladder complications of it. So it's definitely not nothing. And again, like, where's the borderline between people who are abusing a prescription, now getting it on their own, and then just pure recreational use, right? And that's where it becomes complicated, because you can buy, I guess, I don't know if it's the black market or, the gray market, but you can get these lozenges which have ketamine made into a lozenge. So it's a lot easier than taking it intranasally or intravenously, right? And some people administer that lozenge rectally. That's called boofing. Have you heard of boofing before?
I don't know about boofing, no.
There you go. Learn something new every day.
I did.
And like I said, the New York Times article is great because it talks about a bunch of issues. So the issue in the US, people prescribing ketamine for depression. Okay, well, there is some scientific evidence for that, so that's reasonable. But there's two other things that happen around the same time. One has to do with what we're talking about, which is there's things called compounding pharmacies, which will take a drug and compound it into a form that may be easier to take. So I use compounding pharmacies all the time, right? I have a patient who, say, has seizures, but they only make the medication as a pill, but it's a little kid who can't swallow a pill. So what do? You go to a compounding pharmacy and they'll make it up as a liquid, right? But the problem with ketamine, which has the potential to be a drug of abuse, is people are taking this liquid, which should either be given as an intranasal spray or IV, and making into like a lozenge or a tablet, right? Which isn't really the intended effects and perhaps could promote abuse. So that's one thing that's going on. And compounding isn't regulated in the same way that drug manufacturing is regulated. The other thing that came about mainly during the COVID-19 pandemic is the idea of telemedicine for ketamine. So now patients don't have to make an appointment with a doctor. They can go to a ketamine specialist online, answer a few questions, and then get ketamine shipped to them at their house, right? And sometimes for like a relatively cheap price, depending on what they have to pay in their state. So that's another kind of issue that may be contributing to it. And of course, people may start with that, and a lot of these places say, no, we have strict limits on the amount and the dosages. But as we talked about, patients will go to other means, either seeing multiple practitioners or looking at getting things illegally in order to get more and more ketamine.
And who is it, like, with opioids, we can pinpoint not just a company, but an actual family who is responsible, right? The Sackler family is responsible for, so many opioid deaths. And is ketamine sold under different brand names from different companies, or is there one group?
That's a good question. And not really. It's because, again, the main medical use of ketamine by far is for anesthesia. So that's used all the time. Hospitals buy it all the time. That's not really an issue. And then there's the S-ketamine we talked about, which is the nasal spray approved for depression. So I think those things are being used responsibly and being manufactured correctly by the drug companies. So I don't think it's one drug company pushing it. I think the issue is more these online telemedicine doctors plus the compounding pharmacies they've both seen this is a way we can make lots of money, and that's where the money. And so, of course, you have unscrupulous doctors doing this, which actually I guess might lead us into circling back and talking
The
about
Matthew Perry.
poor Matthew Perry. Yeah. So, I mean, Ali and I could both talk about this. We both read some of these articles about it. So try and summarize as quickly as possible what exactly happened. So, as Ali said, they raised this issue on the autopsy about ketamine, and people were charged. So what happened? He tried ketamine initially when he was at a rehab facility in Switzerland. He talks about this in his autobiography. And he went and tried it. He thought he was dying. He says, oh, this is what happens when you die. And there are reports of having the near-death experience when you get ketamine for whatever reason. And he thought he like had a hangover, a ketamine hangover afterwards. He's like, I'm not using this. Forget it. So he left. When he left the clinic, he didn't try it again. But then when he moved back to the States, he tried to get it. And he was prescribed it and then tried to get it more and more from illicit sources. And that's kind of what we were talking about is what happens. And there were, at the end, 5 people, including 2 doctors who were arrested and charged with getting him the ketamine that led to his death. The court documents say that these 2 doctors had sold Matthew Perry tens of thousands of dollars of ketamine. And one of the people who was arrested was Kenneth Imwamasa, who is the personal assistant to Matthew Perry, who injected Matthew Perry with 27 shots of ketamine in the 5 days leading up to his death, including 3 on the day he died.
These personal assistants it's not an easy job, I imagine, but I think of Prince and I think of Michael Jackson, like these personal assistants and personal doctors, either they need sort of a support group or they need to have some kind of guidebook, a union, I don't know, or maybe a little bit of both. Obviously, they're in very awkward positions, but also, these guys then go on to spend a life in prison. Like, I don't think it's worth it to do this.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so what happened is, again, just to update people on this case is, so they indicted 5 people, 3 people pled guilty. So his personal assistant, Mr. Imwamasa, Kenneth, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine causing death. Then there was a doctor named Mark Chavez who sold the ketamine to one of the other doctors, Dr. Placencia. So Chavez pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine. Okay. And he actually made a fraudulent prescription in the name of a former patient. Interestingly, this Dr. Chavez, and again, you can see what I think about him in this statement, he billed himself as the health MD. He was an online longevity coach, an entrepreneur.
Those are all triggering words, Asif, I'll tell you right now.
A fitness trailblazer. He was a medical chemist, whatever that is. And he was a specialist, of course, in regenerative medicine. He had a 12-week weight loss program on his website that gave you Ozempic, but also cost $1,500. So now you can see that a lot of these people are physicians who are in this for the money, in my opinion.
And is he going to jail, Mr. Chavez, or is he?
Chavez pleaded guilty, so I don't know what's going to do. Then Eric,
that's what I meant. Not is he going to jail, but did he plead guilty?
Yeah. Eric Fleming pled guilty. He's an acquaintance of Matthew Perry's, who was pled guilty to a count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine and 1 count of distribution of ketamine resulting in death. Now there are these 2 other people who pled not guilty. Okay, so who are these people? One of the people is someone named Jasveen Sangha, who prosecutors called the ketamine queen. Okay, so apparently was involved quite a bit in
and is pleading not guilty, I guess, because now we have, oh my God, you don't get that nickname and then get to plead not guilty, I don't imagine. But
yeah, exactly.
Good luck.
And then there's this Dr. Salvador Placencia.
That sounds like a name out of a Simpsons episode, by the way, if they were going to have a new doctor show up alongside Dr. Nick.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like these guys, I mean, it's almost like a joke. The court documents say that these defendants would use coded language to discuss drug deals. I read somewhere that they referred to, Matthew Perry as Chandler. They said, okay, we're going to get him Dr. Pepper. They'd call them cans or bots. Like this guy, Dr. Placencia, who you likened, to a colleague of Dr. Nick's from The Simpsons.
Yeah.
He actually texted another doctor about how much to charge Matthew Perry for the ketamine. And Placencia said, I wonder how much this moron will pay. Let's find out.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, man. These are kind of unscrupulous people. As you said, if I had sympathy for anybody, it's perhaps the
Personal
personal
assistant.
assistant who's just doing what Matthew Perry wanted, but you have to draw the line, as you said, somewhere where you're, actually taking responsibility for your own actions and trying to protect another human being who, I'm assuming you're friends with and have a relationship with, and not being an enabler, which I think happens all the time to celebrities. So anyway, this is the whole background. This is why this has been in the news lately, why these people have been charged. And clearly in California and in Los Angeles, they're trying to make a point here that they're trying to really crack down on this illegal distribution of ketamine. That's, again, why it's been in the news so much.
And this assistant, I know you have some sympathy for them, but there's one part from another New York Times article that is less about ketamine, the drug, and more about Matthew Perry. We'll obviously have a link to that. But there's this one paragraph that talks about Mr. Perry saying, "Shoot me up with a big one," he told Mr. Iwamasa, according to a plea agreement that described their interactions on the day of Mr. Perry's death. Then Mr. Iwamasa complied and left Mr. Perry's house to run some errands. "I'm going to shoot you up with a big one. I've shot you up with 26 shots in the last 5 days," right? We said 27 in 5 days, including 3 on the final day of his life. "Shoot me up with a big one." And then this guy just leaves. I don't know if there were errands or there was like soul searching happening about what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I can't keep doing this. This is not sustainable. But if he actually left, gave a massive shot of ketamine, and then was like, "I'm going to get some milk. I think we need milk for the coffee," I just feel like he's a moron who doesn't deserve any of the sympathy we both feel like maybe we should give him. Very interesting, very sad, obviously. The other thing that was interesting about that article is that they have some quotes from a psychiatrist who's the president of the American Society of Ketamine Physicians, Psychotherapists, and Practitioners. It shows that there are many people who are very interested in the potential of ketamine and keeping it very contained and out of the hands of the unscrupulous. But what are you going to do, right? There's a black market for everything. And you're dealing with somebody who very publicly, Matthew Perry had addiction issues, and this was the wrong drug for the wrong guy, unfortunately.
So, as mentioned, we're going to lighten things up a bit and talk about our favorite Friends episodes. So, of course, Friends, this classic sitcom, used to be, do you know what the original name for it was, Ollie?
I don't. I remember hearing it before, but I forget about it.
I believe it was Friends Like Us, I believe was the name of it initially. Then it was changed because there was another sitcom on ABC called These Friends of Mine. That's what I thought was the original name, but actually that's... So anyway, so it just changed to Friends. Of course, classic theme song by the Rembrandts. Everybody knows that song. And 236 episodes total, ran from 1994 to May 6, 2004. So we're going to talk about our favorite episodes. So Ollie and I each picked 5. We haven't revealed our picks to the other person, so it'll be a surprise for each of us. Just to be clear, I'll just give a couple spoilers. I did not pick the final episode, even though that was great. I remember watching that with my wife and my sister-in-law. And my sister-in-law was so upset because you remember they did a trick in that episode where...
In the final one?
In the final one.
What was the trick?
The trick was they said it's going to be an hour long, right? And at about 8:58, there was this thing that happens at the airport where you think, oh, okay, the show's about to end, and Ross and Rachel do not get together. And my sister-in-law was so upset. She's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're ending the show and they're not getting together. But of course, what the creators of Friends did is they paid extra and extended the show, but I can't remember if it was 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. So then Ross and Rachel ended up getting together at the end. Sorry for ruining that for people who haven't seen this.
I think we can ignore those people for the sake of this episode.
It was called The Last One. That was the last episode. So the problem with Friends is that every episode is called the one where they, or the one where something happens, which is a very funny idea, but it becomes very confusing because it's good because you can help to describe. And even when we tell you the title, you might remember what happens in each of these. But anyway, it's just a funny way of doing it. So we're going to talk about them individually. We'll go back and forth. Now, Ali always gets confused when we do a list of things. So should we start with, if we do our top 5, go from our least favorite to our most favorite, or are yours not in any specific order?
I would not say mine are in an order. That would be, yes.
Okay, I've tried to do an order for
all
mine.
over the place. Okay.
As with most things, the order will change depending on your mood and have you watched it recently. So, okay, we're going to go through these and see. Remember, Ali's not in any specific order. I'll try and keep mine in order. So, Ali, why don't you start with your number 5 favorite episode of Friends?
You know, it's just an interesting thing because you go. So, first of all, for me, it was a kind of like, this is like a real thinking exercise. It's all kind of a blur. So then I asked my daughter, both of them started watching it. One of them absolutely hated the show and bailed. But the other one, you know, during the pandemic, this was like her thing. And like she was so into it. And I think we talked about this. It's so interesting that all these shows that might not have found a second life or finding a second life because of the pandemic. People are home. They're like, let me just explore these things that everybody was talking about, for better or for worse. So I asked her, I'm like, what are some of the best ones? Maybe her favorites are my favorites. She also said it's all a blur. I'm like, that was just 3 years ago. What do you mean it's all a blur? So I don't know. I guess that kind of happens. She watched it marathon style too, so I can't really fault her. But she did give me a couple that I thought were okay. The Thanksgiving one and this, and I looked them up. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if that makes my top 5. I am more of a character person and then also an actor person, you know, like so I'm going to give you my first one. It's called The One with the Rumor. It's season 8, episode 9. It was Brad Pitt in it. And Brad Pitt was, you know, behind the scenes, he was married to Jennifer Aniston at the time. And then he comes in as a classmate of Rachel's, and he hated her so much that he co-founded this club called I Hate Rachel Green. I don't know. It was just this interesting thing. They have this little war with each other, and they're a married couple. And I remember, first of all, I love Brad Pitt and everything he does. And I was like, there he is. Unbelievable. And as I was going back, I was like, were they married? They were married, right? There was life of Brad Pitt before Angelina Jolie, and they were. And I just remember liking it. And I don't know if anybody else really did, but I'm going with that one as my number 5.
It's interesting you say that because I thought about that one for sure. And I remember that episode. I thought it was just, the idea of it was actually, I think, better than the execution. The idea of Brad Pitt being there and him not liking her on the show, I thought it was fine. I thought it was good. Yeah, I thought about putting it on, but I didn't. For me, the show is, again, it's hard to remember individual episodes, but we will link to a couple lists where people try and rank either the top 50, one list where they rank every episode, which is crazy and a very intense list to read through. But for me, it depends. Is it something where it's about the plot and the scenes? You know, if there's a scene that I still remember to this day, either laughing or being really touched by, then those are the ones that I include. So that's my number 5 is actually one where it has a scene where maybe it's not funny, but it's very touching. So this is the one with the prom video, season 2, episode 14. This is the key episode in the show where Rachel realizes how much Ross has cared for her over the years. So you guys remember there's a sequence where the friends are seen in the past, and Courtney Cox is, of course, wearing her fat suit, which is, you know, of course, she becomes thin later in the show. Rachel had a nose job in the show, right? So maybe your mileage may vary with some of those depictions, but the redeeming moment, Rachel realizes that Ross was there to step in for her prom date when her prom date didn't show up. And they didn't really get it. You know, she didn't really understand till she saw this old video from their prom. And to me, that was like, this is it. This is what changes them and their relationship, which was really such a central aspect of the show. I think they got away from it a bit with Ross having a baby later, and then Rachel and Joey getting together. Then they finally, as I mentioned in the finale, kind of got back together. We'll talk a bit about what else happens in some of the other episodes we'll be talking about. But anyway, that's my number 5, the one with the prom video. What about your number 4?
Okay. That's your number 5. Again, my numbers are meaningless, but there's one called The One Where Ross Got High, season 6, episode 9. I guess I was enjoying those later episodes, but those later seasons, I didn't think I was, but I guess I was. You know, some of these guys were sort of one trick ponies in their acting, it felt like. And then all of a sudden there'd be some episodes where they were really like doing some good work. And you'd be like, that's why I watched this. But I think it's, it was like television for everybody. They didn't want to rock the boat too much. They didn't want to get too earnest. But where he gets high, I thought that was a funny episode. That's the one my daughter was talking about. She goes, it's the Thanksgiving episode. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I like that one. And I'm like, that's not the Thanksgiving episode. That's the Ross Gets High episode. But she has like different memories of it. Also, Ross and Monica's parents are there. And they were great. Is that Elliot Gould who played Ross?
Yeah, definitely Elliot Gould. I can't remember who played the mom.
Christina Pickles.
Okay, right. Okay,
she is also known for being on St. Elsewhere, and she's been nominated for Emmy Awards many times. Anyway, so they were both great. I thought they did such a great job. They were a perfect couple. Veteran actors come in and really nail it every time. Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, you say it doesn't stand the test of time. I'd be willing to go back and watch a few of these to be like, does it or does it not? Rachel was doing a lot of cooking at that time. It's a Thanksgiving episode, and Rachel was a chef at that point. I think I probably liked that as well. Very quotable episode. There's actually this interaction, this dialogue between Christina Pickles' character, Mrs. Geller, and Joey, Matt LeBlanc, that it's really good as well. I watched a couple of YouTube clips on that. So I think, the one where Ross Gets High makes my top 5.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of Thanksgiving episodes. And then, though, they did them almost every year, not quite every year. They really started heavily in season 3. So it's on my list, but it's the one with the football. I like that one the best because it's the original kind of Thanksgiving episode where they really focus on Thanksgiving and they play football. But I almost made my list, it didn't. So I don't have any Thanksgiving ones, I don't think, on my list. So I'll just go with my number 4, which is the one with the cop, season 5, episode 16. So what happens in this episode? Just to remind you, Joey thinks he's in love with Monica. Phoebe meets a police officer, but that doesn't matter because there is one scene in this episode, which I know everybody remembers. Ross buys a new sofa and is trying to get it into his apartment, but without paying the delivery fee. So Rachel and Chandler agree to help him. And then this is when Ross keeps yelling, pivot, pivot, pivot. It is not just one of the funniest scenes of the show. It's one of the funniest scenes I've seen on a television comedy. It is so good. So this scene it's just so funny. And it really, again, like you said, some of the characters in Friends can be one-note characters, and I think that's one of the limitations of it. But then sometimes they just not just even dive into the complexity of the characters, but just the humor of the characters. And just Ross getting so upset at this and barking the orders is so good. Oh my gosh, what a great episode. So that's my number 4.
That's funny. I looked at a list of like 30 episodes and I was like, the one with the cop, I think that was a good one. And then it says the cop of the one with the cop fame is played by Michael Rappaport, and he's such a pig of a human being that I was like, next. But I forgot about the pivot as he's getting his new couch. And also Phoebe finds the cop badge in the couch cushion at Central Perk, and then she impersonates a police officer. That was also very good. So I did forget about the good part of that episode. So my bad. That's good. The next one for me is a 2-parter. Season 1, episode 16, 17. Do you remember who was on a double date with Monica and Rachel?
Yes, it was Noah Wyle and George Clooney.
Yes, who were famous at the time for their roles in ER. Yeah. So like I said, once they parade the big names around, I get all excited. But I thought that was great. I don't know, something about like mixing people from your other shows into your shows and still doing it in a way where you're not like, oh, this is weird, I can't see them in these roles. And, like when Tom Selleck came on to date Monica, I could not have been more excited. I was like, yes, I'm so starved for Magnum PI. Thank God Tom Selleck's back. But that was a great episode also because I really liked Mad About You. And they were leaning into, Lisa Kudrow playing a waitress again. and then they made her twin sister
Yeah, Ursula was actually the person on
Ursula.
Mad About You because Lisa Kudrow had already been on Mad About You, and then Friends got
Yeah,
picked up. So that's how. And of course, Ursula is like a total like difficult person to interact with,
very
and very
difficult
different than
person.
the
Yeah.
people. So I thought that was so brilliant that they did that.
That
Yeah.
was great too, and she did a great job. Lisa Kudrow doesn't get enough respect for that, I think. And then Ross was learning to be a father through Marcel, his monkey. That was, I think that's a good. I mean, it's a two-parter, so I'm cheating a little bit, but I thought that was like that had a lot of meat, a lot of comedic meat on the bone. That was a good episode.
So my one is slightly similar, and I'll explain why. It's the one with the blackout, season 1, episode 7. I loved this episode, and it's the first episode from the first season where I'm like, yeah, I like this show. This is doing something for me. So the idea there's a power blackout in New York City, and I believe what they did was because a lot of the other shows, I think like Mad About You was on the same right before or right after Friends. So I think Mad About You also had a blackout in it because remember they take place in the same universe because of Ursula and Phoebe, right? So I'm pretty sure that's what happened. I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure it also occurred in Mad About You that same evening on TV. Anyway, so one thing that happens is there's a blackout obviously everywhere. So in Monica's apartment, Ross tries to tell Rachel his feelings, but then a cat jumps on his back and, hijinks ensue. But that's not the best part of the episode. The best part of the episode is Chandler being stuck in an ATM vestibule with a Victoria's Secret model that he admires. And he has this internal monologue where he's getting increasingly panicked because he's trying to interact with this woman and not be creepy. Anyway, it was so good. It made me love Matthew Perry as a comedic actor. I'm like, this guy has it. It's amazing. And it, like I said, it really made me think that this show was really good. So that's my number 3.
My number 2, numero dos, is courtesy of my daughter, who reminded me of this, the one where it's called The One with the Embryos. And that's also good. But really, for me, it's the one where they play this trivia game, because that's where the real comedy was going on. But the embryo is Phoebe is going to be a surrogate mom for her brother, played by Giovanni Ribisi. And actually, Lisa Kudrow was actually pregnant. So they were working that into the script. And it was a nice, sweet way to work in her pregnancy as well. And then, Monica and Rachel get in this gambling battle with Chandler and Joey. And then they have to play this trivia game. And I really like that because we have had those situations in life where trivia games go really bad and way too competitive with friends and your partners. And I thought they did a really, really good job of doing all that. It's like, yeah, I will watch that episode again, given the chance, because I remember that being a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in just a minute.
Oh, will you?
So, yes, a bit of foreshadowing there. So, my number 2 is the one with Ross's wedding, part 2, season 4, episode 24. So, if you guys remember what happens in this one, Ross is getting married in England. And so the whole gang goes to England. And I like this because, again, I like ones that have scenes that I remember or things that change the makeup of the show, right? And 2 things happen in this episode that are amazing. One is that Monica and Chandler get together for the first time. And I remember, when someone leaves the room and then the covers come off and you see that it's Monica and Chandler together, that shock to people was crazy. You could hear the studio audience just gasp at what happened, It was great. And of course, at this wedding, Rachel is ready to kind of admit that things are fine with Ross, and she'll let him go and marry Emily. And then, of course, you guys might remember Ross says the wrong word at the altar, and it changes sort of everything. And it's when Rachel realizes that Ross is still interested in him. There were other Ross and Rachel episodes that I thought about, like the finale or the one where they're on a break, and that what ends up with their first breakup. But I think this is the one for me. So again, in terms of like plot and big moments for characters, that's my number 2. What about Ali? Okay, you're number 1.
Yeah. So this again is a little bit of cheating because it's more than one episode, but it was Fun Bobby. Do you remember Fun Bobby? He doesn't really make anybody's top lists here. But again, like you said, memorable characters, memorable scenes. And Fun Bobby was this guy who Monica's dating him in season 1. He comes back in season 2. The actor who played him, Vincent Ventresca, I never heard his name again. I hope he did all right for himself. He's called Fun Bobby. He appears in The One with the Monkey the first time, and he's expected to be the life of the party and very funny. They call him Fun Bobby, but every time he's on screen, he's in like some kind of distress, major buzzkill, bringing everybody down, shows up crying. His grandfather died, and he still shows up at parties, though. And then eventually he's nicknamed, I think by Chandler, he's nicknamed Ridiculously Dull Bobby. Monica tries to help him give up drinking, and then there's nothing fun about him at all. And so then Monica tries to drink heavily around him to, be somewhat entertained by him. But then Fun Bobby, who is ironically tells her she has a drinking problem, and he breaks up with her because he's like, I can't be in a codependent relationship right now. I like that whole thing. I don't know why. I thought that was very well done. Him and the guy who wore short shorts that were too short, and then everyone could see his testicle on the side of the couch in Central Perk. Those are the people I think of most as side characters that we didn't know.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, obviously Gunther is the number one side character on the show, but never really was a focal point of any episode. Yeah, I forgot about Fun Bobby till I looked up Fun Bobby just now, and I saw the picture of the character. And then as soon as you see it, you'll remember who he is.
Well, I think about him regularly because I always meet people who are stopping drinking for a little bit, and it's inevitably they're just not fun. And sometimes you got to be like, hey man, you should start drinking again, which is a weird thing to say to people. But
yeah, don't take Ollie's advice there. But it is
I didn't
true.
Say it. People say it to people.
This idea of someone, I can't wait for you to meet this, my friend. It's so funny. Oh yeah, we can't wait. And then you meet the person, you're like, oh my God, what? This is brutal.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is always someone like that in everyone's life. But my number one is, and there's lots of different ones I could have chosen, but the one I chose is, Ollie's already talked about it, is the one with the embryos. And so I just think, and again, as Ollie mentioned, it's not really the IVF story with Phoebe. It is that contest. The contest ends up with them switching apartments. It is so funny with Ross as the host of the trivia game that they're playing and going back and forth. The women lose because Rachel doesn't remember that Chandler's TV guide, if you can remember back in the day of TV guides, gets delivered to not Chandler Bing, but Chanandler Bong. I mean, it is such a funny episode. I remember like laughing out loud several times. And also because, again, apart from Phoebe, you get all the friends in one room interacting. Really, really good stuff. So that's probably my favorite episode of the series.
Yeah. And you know what I liked about this little exercise here is that I'd kind of written Friends off as no longer really a source of entertainment, however rude that feels. And I don't know why I'm doing that. I spent so much time watching Friends over the years, but I've just, I've graduated, let's say. I feel like moved on, maybe not moved up, but moved on to different types of comedy. And as we talk about these shows and as I was reading about them, I was like, oh yeah, I do remember this. And then, it was in syndication. I watched a bunch of episodes more than once. And then you start sort of studying it for more than just the entertainment value. And I think there's some good stuff there. And I think it's valuable to look at lists that have like a top 10 or a top 20 and taking 3 to 5 of them and being like, let me revisit Friends. I don't think you have to start at episode 1 or anything.
And it's tough because, like I said, there's some scenes, like you could imagine Ross wearing a brand new leather pants, Joey wearing all of Chandler's clothes, you just remember these things. Joey stumbling upon a cheesecake in the hallway on the ground and seeing them eating it and then eating it. Right. And I think he had a fork with him. He did. Yeah. I mean, these are funny things. There are them things like them having, I think, was it a duck and a chick and stuff like that. Some things were dumb. Ross's monkey, come on. There were some things that I didn't like, but I think we've really hit on what made the show so good.
Here we go. Pivot. 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 Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. okay. I don't think it's gonna pivot anymore. You think?
So that's our episode for today. Let us know what you guys thought. What are your favorite Friends episodes? Let us know, drvcomedian@gmail.com, drvcomedian on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We are everywhere. And also let us know what you thought about our discussion about ketamine. Again, we switched things up. Let us know what you thought about that. Let us know if that was okay. We had to do the more serious topic up front, comedic topic at the end. So hopefully you guys were cool with that. Ali, in September, you got a bunch of stuff going on, but your comedy taping, right?
Comedy album taping. End of September. That thing, and this is not arrogance by any means, that thing is likely going to sell out. 2 shows, 7 and 9. So if anybody's on the fence, I'd say get in there, get some answers. Go to Comedy Bar Danforth, and you can see the show's called Chef's Kiss. 2 shows, 7 and 9 on Thursday, September 26th. And then I'm also hosting on a tour that goes around Ontario, 6 shows, and in Montreal in October. It's called Comedy Here, There, and Everywhere, and it should be a good one. It's Dave Merhej and John Doerr headlining, and I'll be hosting a series of shows.
Excellent. But you know what else is important, Ali?
What's that? Tell me.
It's important for you and our listeners to remember that although I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. Medical issues we talk about are for your interest and information only, and they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
See ya!